Hello, dear listeners. Welcome back to the Times Twists of Fate Times podcast. December 29th. My mother-in-law kicked me out of my own home to make room for 3 relatives. I smiled and agreed. December 31st. She frantically called me 100 times. The card is declined. How are we supposed to feed the guests? The evening of December 29th, there was a light frost in the air. I had just finished cleaning the living room. The fresh scent of floor cleaner still lingered in the air. My hands were damp, and I had hastily tied my hair into a messy bun. I was trying to make everything perfect, organizing and tidying up, as if trying to convince myself. Asterisk. It's almost New Year's Eve, Lauren. Just endure it a little longer for the sake of family peace. Asterisk. But at the exact moment I bent down to straighten the slippers on the shoe rack, the voice of my mother-in-law, Eleanor Lawson, echoed from behind the sofa. Her tone was sickeningly sweet, yet icy at the same time. "Lauren, come here for a second. We need to talk." I quickly wiped my hands on my apron and walked over, thinking she probably wanted me to buy something extra for the holiday dinner or handle some other minor chore. But no. She was perched in the center of the sofa, her back ramrod straight, her hands resting on her knees, looking like a judge awaiting the defendant. Her gaze swept over me from head to toe, a look that was enough to make me realize. Asterisk. You are the help here, not family. Asterisk. Sitting next to her was my husband, Aaron, frantically typing something on his phone, acting as if what was happening didn't concern him in the slightest. Eleanor cleared her throat and spoke, as if bestowing a great favor upon me. "This year, why don't you go spend New Year's with your parents? The condo is going to be too cramped," she added. 3 of our relatives from upstate are coming to stay." I froze in place, a ringing sound filling my ears. I heard every word distinctly, but my brain refused to process it. Asterisk. Cramped? Asterisk. In this spacious 3-bedroom condo, with a massive living room and a separate home office, cramped for whom? For a daughter-in-law? Or just for the very fact of my existence? I tried to keep my tone level, because I knew that in this house, if I raised my voice even a fraction, I would instantly be labeled a hysterical bitch. I asked, as softly as if I were begging for permission. "Eleanor? For how many days?" she answered dismissively, not even looking at me. "You can come back after the first week of January. There'll be a lot of people here. Having you around will just make things awkward." The word times awkward times stung painfully in my chest. Awkward? Because I am Aaron's wife? Or because I am the person who, for the past several years, has been paying for the electricity, water, Wi-Fi, buying the groceries, buying all the gifts for her and my parents, and entirely funding the New Year's extravaganza? This condo was technically in both our names. But truthfully, I had put 3 times more money into it than Aaron had. There was a time when I thought, asterisk, it's fine, my husband is calm and easygoing. I'll just push a little harder so we can build our nest. Asterisk. I comforted myself with those thoughts, only to stand here today and listen to myself being kicked out of the home that I built. I turned to Aaron. There was no pleading in my eyes, only a final, fragile hope. "Aaron, do you have anything to say?" He never even lifted his head from his screen, muttering just one sentence. A sentence I will remember for the rest of my life. "Mom's right. It'll be awkward for the outsiders." Those words, times for the outsiders, times felt like a slap across the face. I stood there, numb. 5 years of marriage. 5 years of single-handedly preparing for every holiday. Enduring her nitpicking, her silent treatments, and my husband's constant evasion. And after all of that, coming from my own husband's mouth, asterisk I times was the outsider making things awkward. I looked at Aaron and suddenly realized that the face of the man who once whispered words of love to me had become as foreign as a stranger passing on the street. The chill in the room didn't come from the weather. It came from this brutal truth. I heard Eleanor continue in an even tone, as if reading from a grocery list. "Since you're leaving, pack your things quickly. Don't drag it out." The guests are arriving tomorrow or the day after. And I still need to deep clean your room. She spoke as if I were a piece of useless clutter that needed to be swept out of sight. I wanted to ask, clean whose room? A room in my own house? But I swallowed the words. Not out of fear, but because I suddenly had an epiphany. When people have firmly decided to treat you as a stranger, any attempt to explain yourself will only deepen your humiliation. I straightened my posture and took a deep breath. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't complain. I merely offered a faint smile, a smile that surprised even me, and said, "All right, Eleanor. I'll go to my parents' house." Eleanor raised an eyebrow in surprise, clearly not believing I would agree so quickly. She had probably been banking on a screaming match so she could later tell her relatives, "My daughter-in-law is such a psycho." But I didn't give her the satisfaction. She stayed quiet for a second, then threw out one more sentence, sharp as a needle. "When you leave your credit card here. For the holiday expenses, just in case we need anything." I looked at her with a calmness that astonished me. "Sure, Eleanor. Don't worry about it." Only then did Aaron look up, his eyes searching my face. "Are you seriously leaving?" I nodded. "Seriously. You stay here, take care of your mother and the guests." I walked into the master bedroom and opened the closet, pulling out my suitcase. The sound of the zipper ripping through the dead silence was deafening. I packed a few sets of clothes. Not a lot. I knew I wasn't going on a vacation. I was simply leaving a place where I was no longer considered family. When I rolled my suitcase back into the living room, Eleanor was sitting in the exact same spot. Her lips were curled into a slight smirk, a look of triumphant victory in her eyes. Aaron was standing in the doorway. He didn't offer to help with my bags, nor did he say a single kind word. I walked right past them, gripping the handle of my suitcase tightly, my soul surprisingly at peace. I guess when a person is backed into a corner, they have no tears left, only cold determination. I opened the front door and stepped out into the hallway. A gust of cold air hit my face. I turned around and took one last look at the door to my condo. Not with regret, but to commit it to memory. I memorized Eleanor's triumphant gaze. I memorized Aaron's cowardly silence. I memorized every word they had said, because sometimes those are the exact words a person needs to wake up from a long, deep sleep. I dragged my suitcase down to the lobby. No one saw me off, but there was one thing they didn't know. On the night of December 31st, when the party they envisioned as the event of the year would be in full swing, when they felt certain that one swipe of a piece of plastic would guarantee them a table groaning under the weight of expensive food, it would be Eleanor Lawson frantically blowing up my phone. Maybe she would call 100 times, her voice cracking with pure terror. Asterisk. The card is declined. How do we feed the guests? Asterisk. And only then would they realize that the person they called an outsider was, in fact, the person whose dime they had been living on this entire time. I arrived at my parents' house in the suburbs after dark. My mom saw me at the front door and, before she could even ask anything, froze. I hastily forced a weak smile. I missed home, decided to come early. My mom isn't the type to pry. She just took my hand and said softly, "Come inside, sweetheart. It's freezing out." I sat on the sofa, listening to the cheerful holiday specials playing on the TV, but my soul felt empty. That night, lying in my old bed, staring at the familiar ceiling, my mind involuntarily replayed everything that had led me to this moment. I thought that if it hadn't been for those good early days, I would never have tolerated this for so long, because there truly was a time when I believed my marriage was going to be happy. Aaron and I met at the bank. I worked in corporate lending, constantly chasing quotas, meeting clients, buried under piles of loan documents. Sometimes I'd leave the house before dawn and get back late at night. My feet ached from exhaustion. Aaron worked in the administrative department, quiet, a man of few words, always neat and calm. When I first started, I was frequently overwhelmed by the sheer volume of work. Aaron, seeing my confusion, would quietly come over, help me sort things out, and show me the best ways to file the paperwork. He wasn't a smooth talker, but his care showed in his quiet actions. Back then, I thought finding a guy like him was a stroke of incredible luck. In that high-stress, cutthroat corporate environment, finding someone without an ego or a fake persona felt like a real gift. When we started dating, Aaron was incredibly tender. He didn't make grandiose promises. He talked about simple, domestic things, and precisely because they were simple, I believed him. Once, I was so exhausted I was just sitting on the steps outside the bank, completely drained. He walked up, handed me a bottle of water, and said quietly, "When we get married, I'll never let anyone hurt you." I remembered that phrase like a warm coat on a bitter winter day. I genuinely believed that if I just tried my best and was a good person, our family life would be wonderful. We had a modest wedding. I didn't demand a massive diamond or a lavish venue. All that mattered was that a husband and wife loved each other. After the wedding, I kept working, even harder than before. I always believed that, even as a woman, I could take on responsibility and help my husband secure our future. My salary was almost double Aaron's, but I never held it over his head. I told myself, asterisk, my husband is a good man. He's not cruel. So what if he makes less? The main thing is that he loves and respects me. Asterisk. It was my idea to put down the bulk of the money when we bought our condo. Not because I wanted a power trip, but because I believed a husband and wife were a team. A shared home. A shared future. I was even proud of myself. I was building our family nest. On the day we signed the closing documents and got the deed, I insisted the property be in both our names. Aaron quickly agreed, acting as if it were a given. But there was one person who didn't see it that way. His mother, Eleanor. She was with us that day. She looked at the deed, then at me, and with a crooked smirk tossed out a comment, half joking, half serious. Modern girls are so grasping. They never miss a chance to get their names on things. There were several people in the closing room. Everyone smiled politely to smooth over the awkwardness. I smiled too. I told myself, asterisk, oh, my mother-in-law is just joking. Older people can be blunt. Don't take it to heart. Asterisk, I even scolded myself for being overly sensitive, terrified of coming across as the paranoid daughter-in-law who ruins the family dynamic. During the first few years, I really tried my hardest. For the holidays, I bought the presents, the expensive catering, sent money to my parents and her relatives, prepared cash envelopes for her nieces and nephews, and paid for the renovations in the condo. One year, the roof over the balcony leaked. I paid for the repairs without a second thought. Another year, the fridge broke. I paid for that, too. I didn't brag about it. I just thought I was part of the family, and if the house needed something, I should step up. It would make life easier for both of us. Aaron helped sometimes, but mostly just for show. The major decisions and the financial heavy lifting always fell on me. Strangely, it didn't feel like a burden back then. I felt I was fulfilling my duty as a wife and a daughter-in-law. Every time I made a major purchase, Eleanor would say something that sounded like a compliment but always left a bitter aftertaste. It's a good thing we have such a times career, woman times for a daughter-in-law, or we'd all be starving. After saying this, she would usually shoot a look at Aaron, as if scolding him for being less capable than his wife, then turn back to me and smile, as if handing me a trophy. I smiled back. But over time, I began to realize it wasn't a compliment. It felt more like an invisible rope slowly tightening around my neck. If I was the career woman, that meant I had to provide. If I was the boss lady, that meant I had to carry everything on my back. And the caustic undertone in her voice made it clear. She wasn't happy for my success. She was only happy that I could fund her son's life. Sometimes over dinner, she would tell stories about neighbors whose daughters-in-law didn't help out financially. She would click her tongue. A woman gets married and starts penny pinching. There will never be peace in a family like that. Listening to this, I became even more terrified of being labeled greedy, so I tried never to count pennies. I chose silence, patience, and always doing just a little more than necessary. I thought that this way, I'd earn her approval. I thought that one day, she'd accept me as a daughter. I thought that if I just lived decently and endured, everything would work out. But the harder I tried, the more distinctly I felt that something was wrong. I began to understand that in Eleanor's eyes, I wasn't a daughter-in-law in the sense of family. I was a resource, a talking ATM that knew how to smile and serve on cue. When I was exhausted, no one asked if I was okay. When I had problems at the bank, Aaron would just say, "Well, just tough it out," and Eleanor would declare, "A woman is lucky to even have a job these days. What is there to complain about?" It sounded like advice, but it was as cold as ice. I suddenly realized that the family peace I believed in so deeply was actually balanced entirely on my tolerance. If I endured it, the house was quiet. If I stayed silent, the house was at peace. But the moment I raised my voice, that peace would instantly shatter. That night, lying in my childhood home, watching my mother sleep and listening to the wind howling outside the window, my eyes began to sting, not because I was mourning the condo, and not because I was afraid of losing my money. I felt a deep, bitter sorrow realizing that I had entered this marriage with pure faith, while on the other side, I was never considered one of their own. And I didn't even know that the worst was yet to come. But even then, a rock-solid conviction took root in my soul. If I continued to be the career woman in the way they demanded, one day I would just burn to the ground, forever remaining an outsider to them. I stayed at my parents' house in the suburbs for a few days, but my mind wouldn't rest. Not because I missed the condo, but because the same question kept spinning in my head. Asterisk. How did it come to this? Asterisk. Out of the habit of someone who had lived in silence for years, I began mentally sifting through the past to figure it out. And I realized that the root of all these problems didn't start on December 29th. It started in the 3rd year of our marriage, when my mother-in-law stopped giving me veiled compliments and started testing my boundaries in a different way. With small, seemingly harmless requests that, repeated constantly, can break down any door. At that time, Aaron's and my life was stable. I worked in the lending department, where my base pay and bonuses depended on hitting quotas, so my income fluctuated, but it was generally more than enough to run the household. Aaron's job was steady, no real career growth, but no risk of being fired either. I still thought that if we didn't spend recklessly and saved up, we'd soon have a solid nest egg for the future. Right around the time I started heavily planning our savings, Eleanor began pulling me into the kitchen, lowering her voice as if terrified someone might overhear. "Lauren, sweetie, zella me a little money for my sister. Things are really bad for her downstate." I remember she spoke very softly that day, adding a line perfectly designed to trigger guilt. "It's a sin not to help family." I transferred the money without a second thought. 50 or $100 wasn't a huge amount. I even told myself that helping my husband's relatives was a way to keep the peace. But life is funny like that. When you give the first time, people realize you're kind. When you give a second time, they confirm you're compliant, and by the 3rd and 4th time, they aren't asking anymore. They're demanding. A week later, Eleanor pulled me aside again. "Lauren, Uncle Mike's back is acting up. The doctor prescribed some expensive meds. I'm a little short. Venmo me. Please." I sent the money again. A few days after that, Aunt Kathy's kid needs help with his college tuition. They're going to drop him from his classes if he doesn't pay. Be a good person. Help them out. I sent the money again. Back then, I didn't feel used. I thought I was acting like a proper daughter-in-law, looking out for my husband's side of the family, showing generosity. But these requests didn't stop at a couple of $100. They spread like an oil slick on water. Money for a distant relative's roof repair. Money for a funeral. Money for gifts because people are coming to visit and I don't even have anything to serve them. What will they say about me? I started ringing the alarm bells when, at the end of 1 month, I noticed a massive chunk of my checking account was gone. At the start of the month, right after payday, I felt secure. By the middle, I was already clipping coupons. There were months where, by rough estimates, I was bleeding over $1,500 just to her, while struggling to remember what I had actually bought for our own household. I wasn't a miser, but working at the bank trained me to pay attention to the numbers and track cash leaks. I sat down and mapped it out on paper. HOA fees, utilities, groceries, gas, gifts for my parents. And then I added up all the sums my mother-in-law had requested. The final number sent a chill down my spine. I didn't immediately raise hell, afraid of causing a scene. I took a soft approach, acting like a daughter-in-law who just wanted to have a discussion, not an argument. Eleanor, maybe we should budget our expenses a little better so I know what to expect? Before I could even finish my sentence, Eleanor's face morphed instantly. It happened so fast, I didn't even realize what mistake I had made. She slammed her coffee mug onto the table and snapped. Is this times your times money? You're a daughter-in-law in this house, which means you need to think about your relatives. That phrase felt like a brand stamped on my forehead. I earn the money, but she decides how to spend it. I sat in silence. I didn't argue. I just felt my status instantly downgraded from helpful provider to indentured servant. I looked at Aaron, hoping he would say at least one word in my defense. But Aaron just pulled me into the bedroom and, in his usual pacifying tone, whispered, "Come on, Lo. Mom is getting older. Why start a massive fight over a few bucks?" The words "times a few bucks times" made my jaw clench. Whose bucks were they? My hard-earned money was just a few bucks to him? I desperately wanted to ask, but I held it in again. I realized that in this house, Aaron wasn't on anyone's side. He was on the side of least resistance, which meant I had to be the one to yield. After that incident, Eleanor stopped asking timidly. She started treating my money as her divine right. Once, while I was at work, my phone buzzed. A short text from her. Asterisk Venmo me $500. Asterisk. No Lauren, sweetie. No please. No explanation. I called her to ask what it was for. She answered curtly, "For the relatives." I sent it and felt completely pathetic. I was transferring money like a robot, as if all she had to do was push a button and my cash would instantly deploy. I didn't notice when I had transformed into a switch that others could flip at their convenience. As the holidays approached, the feeling that I was simply being milked became glaringly obvious. Before New Year's Eve, my phone blew up with her texts. Asterisk. Buy gifts for your uncle. Buy premium groceries for your aunt. Order a custom cake so we don't look cheap in front of the guests. Asterisk. And the creepiest part, she found out about my bonuses before I even knew. I hadn't even had a chance to tell my husband, and she was already calling. "I heard your bank paid out bonuses early this year." Perfect. That means we're doing New Year's right. I shuddered. I never told her. How was she finding out? This level of surveillance gave me the creeps. I began to realize that the holiday season wasn't a time for family bonding. It was extortion season. One evening, I came home dead on my feet. I barely set my bag down when I heard my mother-in-law's commanding tone. "Go to the ATM tomorrow and get me some cash. I need to give it to the relatives." I looked at Aaron. He pretended to be busy with something else. I sat down, a lump forming in my throat. I had the money to pull out, but I had zero feeling that anyone in this house respected me. I finally understood. They didn't view me as family. They viewed me as a well. And a well is supposed to provide water without asking questions. But even then, I still tried to endure it. I convinced myself that every family has its issues, that if you have the means to help, you should, that I was doing a good deed. I was terrified of being seen as the woman who, the second she got a little money, became an arrogant snob. Most of all, I was terrified my mother-in-law would run to the entire extended family and tell them how selfish I was. I lived in that fear, completely unaware that this very fear was what made me so vulnerable to their manipulation. And I had absolutely no idea that this New Year's would be the last time they could treat my money as a given, as something they could demand on a whim. Because when you back someone into a corner, they either break or they wake up. And I was starting to wake up. I started to wake up because of these endless demands. But it was only this December that I realized that in my mother-in-law's eyes, I wasn't just a wallet. I was an open wallet that was expected to auto-dispense on command. December. The bank was buzzing like a beehive. End-of-year targets were crushing everyone. We were all running around like crazy. I was meeting clients from dawn till dusk, sometimes just inhaling a sandwich in the hallway before diving back into meetings, signing contracts, and running compliance checks. I wasn't trying to show off. I was just trying to maintain my professional reputation and my sanity. At least I earned my money through my own hard work, without begging anyone for it. At the final quarterly meeting, our department crushed our targets. Management announced an unscheduled bonus. I personally was awarded $15,000 for exceeding my numbers and bringing in several major corporate accounts. When I got the direct deposit notification, my hands shook. Not out of greed, but because a simple thought flashed through my mind. Asterisk. This year, I can get my parents something really nice. I can fix the porch at their house. I can buy my dad that high-end blood pressure monitor. Asterisk. I had promised myself a long time ago that as soon as I had the means, I would repay my parents for all the years they scrimped and saved to give me everything. I even planned to buy Aaron a nice new winter coat. Even though he rarely cared about fashion, I thought, asterisk, we're a family. Times get tough. If I have it, I'll share it. The main thing is keeping our home warm. Asterisk. But life is ironic. I didn't have time to tell anyone. I didn't even have time to properly celebrate. That very evening at dinner, Eleanor, scooping a piece of meat onto her plate, casually dropped a statement as if it had been decided long ago. The relatives from downstate are coming for New Year's this year. Get the budget ready. I froze, my soup spoon halfway to my mouth. I looked up at her, trying to keep my voice polite. Eleanor, roughly how much do you think we'll need? She answered instantly, without missing a beat. I figure 10 grand should cover it. I was stunned. $10,000? For 3 relatives coming to stay, eat, party, and go on a shopping spree? For the exact same relatives who had never once asked me how I was doing, let alone said a kind word to me? I felt something knot in my stomach. I put my spoon down and, taking a deep breath to steady my voice, said, Eleanor, but I need to help my own parents too. They're getting older. I said it very softly. I didn't say, asterisk, this is my money. Asterisk, I merely pointed out that I had other obligations. But Eleanor instantly exploded. Her voice turned razor sharp. This house has fed you for 5 years. Is that not enough for you? You got married. So forget about yours and theirs. A daughter-in-law's first duty is to think of her husband's family. At the word times fed asterisk, my face flushed hot. Fed me for 5 years? I work. I pay the mortgage. I pay the utilities. I buy the groceries. I carry the vast majority of the financial burden in this house. I had never taken a single dime from anyone, yet in her version of reality, I was a freeloader. This uncanny ability to turn reality entirely upside down left me speechless. I looked at Aaron, praying he would say something. Anything. But he kept his eyes glued to his plate, chewing in silence as if he couldn't hear a thing, as if this was just women's drama that a man shouldn't get involved in. His silence that night wasn't just his usual desire to keep the peace. It was the silence of a man who had abandoned his wife in a corner. And that silence was so cold that I felt entirely alone in the middle of my own kitchen. Seeing me stay quiet, Eleanor curled her lip. You work at a bank. You probably got a fat bonus. We need to maintain our image for New Year's so people don't go around saying we're cheapskates. I desperately wanted to argue that a family's image is defined by how they treat each other, not by how lavish a spread they put on a table. but I held my tongue. I knew that arguing with her now would only give her an excuse to start screaming. I sat in silence, finishing my dinner. But every bite felt like ash in my mouth. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept wondering how she found out about the bonus so quickly. I hadn't told Aaron. The more I thought about it, the more anxious I became. The next morning, I checked my phone, nothing unusual. But that afternoon, when I stopped by an ATM to pull out some cash for my parents, I noticed strange pending transactions on my account. I opened my banking app and saw several massive charges at a high-end supermarket and a luxury boutique. The amounts were staggering. I froze. I immediately called Aaron. He picked up, sounding rushed. "What's up, Lo?" I asked point blank. "Did you use my card? Where are these charges coming from?" Aaron was silent for a few seconds, then answered as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "Oh, Mom took the authorized user card to go buy groceries. She said it was easier that way." It felt like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over my head. Asterisk. The authorized user card? What authorized user card? Asterisk. I remembered that ages ago, I had ordered a backup card with Aaron's name on my account for emergencies, but I had kept it in my drawer. Now it was in his mother's hands. I asked, no longer able to mask my fury. "When did you give her that card?" Aaron replied softly, trying to pacify me. "Just a couple of days ago. Mom said she'd handle all the shopping so she wouldn't have to bother you. You know, since you're so busy, the phrase times so she wouldn't have to bother you times cut deep. So, in this house, my money is theirs to spend whenever they want, without asking, without accounting for it. I was no longer in control of my own bank account. That evening, I came home and saw Eleanor sitting at the dining table, writing out a shopping list and muttering calculations to herself. I walked right up to her and asked directly, "Eleanor, do you have my credit card?" She looked up, completely unbothered. "Yes, I have it. It's just easier before the holidays. You're the daughter-in-law. If you have the means, you should be helping out, not asking stupid questions." Hearing that, my hands started to shake. Not out of fear, but out of absolute rage and sudden clarity. I looked at Aaron. He looked away. For the first time in my entire married life, I fully understood what betrayal felt like within the walls of a home I considered my own. From that moment on, I realized this wasn't about the $10,000. It was the fact that they were openly demonstrating their absolute contempt for me, contempt so deep they didn't even bother hiding it anymore. And when people stop hiding their contempt, it means they are fully confident you will just keep taking it. Except they didn't know that my patience had officially run out. And on December 29th, when Eleanor kicked me out to my parents' house to make room for her 3 relatives, I saw the absolute truth of the situation with crystal clarity. I just didn't say it out loud. But deep in my soul, I made a decision as hard as steel. From this day forward, no one would ever treat my money as their God-given right again. The morning of December 29th, I woke up at 6 a.m. It was still pitch black outside. A cold draft seeped through the window seals. I quietly slipped out of bed. Terrified of waking Aaron, threw on my robe and went to the kitchen. I don't know why I kept acting like a wind-up toy, cooking, cleaning, as if it were just a normal day. I suppose years of marriage had conditioned me to believe everything had to be perfect, so no one could find a reason to criticize me. I kneaded dough, put oatmeal on the stove, kept an eye on the burners. My hands moved frantically, as if I were racing against the clock. My head was still spinning with yesterday's arguments about the $10,000, about the backup credit card sitting in my mother-in-law's purse. But I kept trying to talk myself down. Asterisk. It's fine. New Year's is coming. Just do what needs to be done. You don't want to start the year with a massive fight. Asterisk. I finished baking, wiped down the windows and the counters, changed the water in the vases. Every time I bent over, a sharp ache radiated through my lower back from pure exhaustion. But I didn't dare complain. By 8 a.m., the condo was sparkling clean and bright. The The kitchen smelled of fresh pastries. Only then did I stand up straight and take a deep breath. I looked around, and my soul felt hollow. It's a bizarre feeling when you do absolutely everything, yet no one ever asks, "Are you tired? Can I help?" Aaron was still asleep. Eleanor was already up, sitting in the living room and talking loudly on her phone. Her voice echoed through the entire condo, as if she wanted the whole building to hear her. "Yes, yes, of course, come on down." The more the merrier. "It's going to be loud and fun this year. We have plenty of room. Don't worry about a thing." I stood in the kitchen and heard every single word. Asterisk. Loud and fun. Asterisk. For who? For the relatives. For the guests. The daughter-in-law is just an obstacle that needs to be removed. I walked into the living room. Eleanor was lounging on the sofa, leaning back. She shot me a quick glance and went right back to bragging into the receiver. "Of course you should come. New Year's is all about having guests. An empty house is no way to celebrate. My daughter-in-law is great. She's prepping everything. She's taking care of it all." Saying this, she smiled a smug, self-satisfied smile. I stood there listening to times my daughter-in-law is great asterisk, and I almost laughed. Normally, she never referred to me as family. Only when she needed to show off did she put me on display like a trophy. I saw Aaron stumble out of the bedroom, hair disheveled, half asleep. He walked right past me like I was a piece of furniture. He didn't ask what time I got up. Didn't notice what I had done in the kitchen. He just sat down, poured himself a glass of water, and sighed like a man burdened by his own heavy problems. Right around noon, the doorbell rang. Before I could even move, Eleanor sprang up as if she were coiled on a spring. Standing on the threshold were the 3 relatives she had invited: Uncle Mike, Aunt Kathy, and their son, Ian. They strutted into the condo acting as if they owned the place. Aunt Kathy had barely set her bags down before delivering a line that let me know she had been coached beforehand. "Wow, it's so nice here in the city. A place like this for New Year's is a dream." Eleanor practically glowed with pride. "Well, it is our place. My son bought it." Hearing times, "my son bought it" times made my eyes sting. I wasn't expecting a parade in my honor, but they didn't have to credit my hard work entirely to someone else. I turned away, commanding myself, asterisk, do not react. That's exactly what they want. Asterisk. At lunchtime, I set the table. I hadn't even sat down yet when Eleanor cleared her throat and delivered her final verdict. "All right, Lauren, pack up and go to your folks. If you stay here, it'll be too crowded for everyone. Head out quickly so you aren't in the way." Asterisk, in the way. Asterisk, I froze. I looked at her, then at Aaron. He averted his eyes and threw out a line clearly meant to extinguish the fire. "Yeah, just go for a few days. Relax. We'll figure things out after the holidays." Asterisk. We'll figure things out after the holidays. Time sounded so apathetic, so utterly devoid of responsibility. I suddenly realized that to him, I was an object. I could be there, or I could not be there. When they needed money, energy, or free labor, they summoned me. When guests arrived, when they needed to maintain their image, I became a nuisance. I didn't say another word. I went into the bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled out my suitcase. The sound of the zipper was deafening. I packed my clothes, my hands no longer shaking. The trembling stopped the moment I fully grasped the reality of the situation. I rolled my suitcase into the living room. Eleanor looked at me like someone who appreciated my compliance, even rewarding me with one last remark. "It's smart of you to leave early. No need to make people uncomfortable during the holidays." I just nodded, deadpan. I dragged the suitcase out the front door. No one helped me. Aaron stood there with a face carved from stone, merely repeating his line. "We'll figure it out after the holidays." Uncle Mike was chewing on something, smirking. Ian was scrolling through his phone. Aunt Kathy was inspecting the condo's decor as if appraising its value. I walked past them, and my soul turned freezing cold. It was the coldness of a person who had finally, Completely lost hope, I ordered an Uber. When the car pulled up, I got in and looked through the window. Eleanor was still standing on the threshold, arms crossed, looking incredibly pleased with herself, like she had just successfully removed a roadblock. I didn't cry. Tears felt entirely pointless now. I just sat up straight, staring at the road, my mind completely blank. Arriving at my parents' house in the suburbs, the first thing I heard from my mom was, "Why are you here so early, sweetie?" My dad, who was watching TV, also looked up. Did something happen? I forced a tight smile. Just missed home. Decided to come early. I didn't want my parents spending New Year's Eve sick with worry. I wanted them to have peace of mind. That night, after everyone in the house had gone to sleep, I lay alone and opened my phone. The glow of the screen reflected on the ceiling. I opened my banking app, stared at the numbers, and remembered my mother-in-law's command. Asterisk. Leave your credit card here. Asterisk. I let out a quiet laugh. Turns out, they kicked me out. But they wanted me to stay in the form of a piece of plastic. I sat up. I went into the security settings. I changed all my passwords, my PIN codes, my two-factor authentication numbers. I permanently locked the authorized user card. I canceled all auto-pays. I went through every single menu option meticulously, like a person locking every deadbolt on a house before a Category 5 hurricane. When I finished, I turned off the screen, set the phone down, and felt a bizarre sense of total peace. Not because I had won, but because I had finally done what I should have done years ago. I protected what was mine. I lay down, pulled the blanket up, and listened to the wind outside. I knew for an absolute fact that on December 31st, when they marched into the luxury supermarket, when they tried to swipe that card for their extravagant holiday feast, everything was going to crash down around them. And I wouldn't have to lift a finger. I just had to wait for the first phone call. Not out of malice, but because I knew some people only see the light when they hit rock bottom. The evening of December 31st. My parents' house was bustling, a warm, cozy bustle, completely devoid of pretense. My mom was preparing appetizers. My dad was polishing the old credenza. I was helping Mom arrange the fruit and chocolates. The house smelled of pine needles, mandarin oranges, and fresh baking, that classic New Year's scent that instantly puts your soul at ease. I was just finishing setting the table when my phone started vibrating violently against the wood. Once is fine, but continuous, rapid-fire vibration is never normal. I glanced at the screen. Asterisk, Eleanor asterisk. The name flashed, went dark, and flashed again. The vibration wouldn't even stop before the next call came through. Then, a barrage of texts from Aaron. Asterisk. Pick up the phone. Emergency. Asterisk. I didn't answer immediately. I set the phone aside and kept doing what I was doing, pretending I couldn't hear it. My mom shot me a look and asked quietly, "Who's calling?" "Honey, just work stuff, Mom." I smiled softly. Probably some year-end glitch. I'll deal with it later. I refused to let my mother worry on the last night of the year. The phone kept vibrating like it was having a seizure. I watched the missed call counter tick upward. 10, 20, almost 30. Only then did I pick it up and hit accept. I didn't offer a hurried hello. I just said, with total, absolute calm. The other end of the line instantly exploded. Eleanor's voice was a shrill shriek, screaming every word as if she were trying to puncture my eardrums. "What the hell did you do? The card is declined. We're standing in the middle of Whole Foods. People are staring. It's the ultimate humiliation." In the background, I could hear the chaos. The beeping of cash registers, shopping carts clattering, a cashier's voice saying, "Ma'am, the payment isn't going through." I pictured her standing in the middle of a massive crowd, face beet red, eyes bulging. Her pride was currently jammed inside a Verifone credit card terminal. She wasn't terrified of starving. She was terrified of looking poor. I didn't yell back. I didn't mock her. I just asked, as calmly as if we were discussing the weather, "Eleanor, What were you trying to buy that was so urgent? She lost her mind even more. Are you an idiot? It's New Year's Eve. Prime rib, wild-caught salmon, caviar, champagne. We have guests sitting at the house. Am I supposed to walk back in empty-handed? Hearing the word times guests asterisk, I understood perfectly. This was the legendary party she had been bragging about to everyone. The extravaganza meant to blow everyone's minds with its sheer opulence. I took a deep breath and delivered a single sentence. No emotion. But it changed everything. There are hosts in that house. You should ask them to pay for it. I was kicked out. Remember? What right do I have to pay for your party? Silence fell over the line for a split second, followed by a new eruption. She screamed, "You dare talk to me about rights? You are a daughter-in-law. You are obligated to take care of us. What you are doing is a sin. Do you understand me?" Before I could reply, I heard a scuffle in Aaron's voice. He had clearly wrestled the phone away from her. His tone was pleading, but underneath it lay the passive aggression I knew so well. "Lo, don't do this. We have guests. Just unlock the card. We'll talk about this after the holidays." That phrase, times after the holidays, times made me laugh out loud. After the holidays, they would have pretended nothing happened. They would have forced me to swallow my pride again, forced me back into the role of the sweet, compliant wife for the sake of family peace. I laughed quietly, not sadistically, but out of pure shock at how stupid I used to be. "After what holiday, Aaron?" "On the 29th, you called me an outsider. Outsiders aren't obligated to fund your private banquets." Aaron went dead silent. I could hear his heavy breathing over the phone. He tried to lower his voice so the people in the supermarket wouldn't hear him, but he still tried to pressure me. "Lauren, stop it. Just unlock the app. Don't ruin the holiday." Then Eleanor snatched the phone back. Her tone shifted to the lecturing, moralizing voice I had heard 1,000 times. "You are a daughter-in-law. Leaving your family to starve on New Year's is a sin. People are going to laugh at us. What kind of shameless monster did your parents raise?" The second she dragged my parents into it, the blood in my veins turned to ice. I kept my voice perfectly level, but every word hit like a sledgehammer. "Eleanor, you kicked me out to my parents' house so you could invite your relatives. That means you chose them, so ask them to pay." Eleanor gasped for air and spat out bitterly. "So you're counting every penny now? Is that it?" I answered curtly. "No, I'm just trying to understand my place. And my place, as you made perfectly clear, is out the door." I hung up, not waiting to hear the rest of her holiday curses. I set the phone down. My hands were perfectly steady, but I knew this wasn't the end, and I was right. Less than 10 minutes later, the texts started raining down like hail. Asterisk. Unlock the card immediately. Asterisk. Asterisk. This is unforgivable. Asterisk. Asterisk. Do not test my patience. Asterisk. 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 You have no idea what I will do to you. Asterisk. I didn't reply. I didn't engage in a text war. I just took screenshots of every single message and saved them meticulously, like a person gathering rocks for a slingshot. My mom, seeing me staring at my phone for so long, asked, "Is everything okay, sweetie?" I looked up and tried to smile again. "Everything is fine, Mom. I've got it handled." But the reality was, I knew exactly what was happening. They didn't think kicking me out was a mistake. They thought the mistake was the card being locked. In their minds, my physical presence was irrelevant, as long as the money stayed behind. I was about to turn the phone off when, at exactly 7:30 p.m., one more text came through from Aaron. Just one sentence. It sent a horrific chill down my spine. Asterisk. If you don't unlock the card, Mom is going to drive to your parents' house and make a massive scene. Asterisk. I stared at the screen for a long time in silence. Not because I was afraid of a scene, but because I had finally seen their true colors in high definition. If they didn't get what they wanted, they were willing to trample over anyone, even my parents, to force me into submission. I gripped the phone tight, set it on the table, and went back to helping my mom set out the silverware. But a rock-solid decision had formed in my mind. From the exact moment Aaron sent that threat, our marriage ceased to be a matter of emotions. It had escalated to blackmail, and I absolutely refused to let my parents become collateral damage in their shameless game. Aaron's text was the absolute final straw. I didn't reply right away. I set the phone down, took a deep breath, and forced my voice and movements to remain perfectly steady. I didn't want to terrify my parents, but the harder I tried to look calm, the more I felt the boiling rage inside me. They actually had the audacity to threaten to show up at this house to intimidate me. That meant they not only had zero respect for me, but they viewed my parents with equal contempt. My mom was still laying out the appetizers. My dad was lighting the candles on the table. Our small, warm home was suddenly in the path of an approaching hurricane. I walked up to my mom and said quietly, "Mom, just keep doing what you're doing. If anyone shows up, let me handle it." My mom looked at me, eyes wide with alarm, but she nodded. My dad didn't ask questions. He just slowly placed a candle on the table and looked at me with a long, piercing gaze. The gaze of a father who realizes his daughter is dealing with something she absolutely does not deserve. Around 8 p.m., exactly as I expected, a car slammed its brakes outside our front gate. A car door slammed shut, a sound that echoed like a gunshot in the quiet, snowy suburban street. I stepped out onto the front porch. The glow from the street lamp illuminated the snow-covered driveway. I recognized Aaron's SUV. Eleanor got out first. Her face was contorted with pure, unadulterated rage. Behind her came Uncle Mike, Aunt Kathy, and Ian, the same three relatives who had sat in my condo on the 29th, smirking at me. Now, they looked like a mob arriving to collect a mafia debt. Aaron was the last to get out. His eyes darted around nervously. He looked like he was either terrified or trying to figure out which role he was supposed to play in this disaster. The moment the gates swung open, Eleanor stormed into the yard, not even bothering to greet my parents. She planted herself in the middle of the driveway and started screaming at the top of her lungs, clearly hoping the neighbors would hear. "Look at this. Every normal family has a daughter-in-law prepping for the holidays, but mine locks her credit card so the whole family has to sit around starving." Hearing this from the kitchen window, my mom froze with a plate of fruit in her hands. My dad stepped out onto the porch. His face went pale with anger, but he still tried to maintain a baseline of decency. "Eleanor, lower your voice. It's New Year's Eve." Before he could finish his sentence, she cut him off, pointing a shaking finger at our house. "Is this how you raised your daughter? To be a disrespectful little bitch?" She humiliated me. She humiliated our entire family. Her words were like daggers thrown blindly, without a single shred of truth, meant only to inflict maximum pain. Aaron intervened. His voice was equal parts pleading and threatening, the classic tone of a man trying to apply pressure while keeping up the facade of the good husband. "Lauren, step out here. We need to talk. Don't embarrass the elders." I looked dead at him, enunciating every single word. "You dragged a mob of people to my parents' house to threaten me. And you call this talking?" Aaron faltered and shot a look at his mother. Eleanor instantly stepped forward and hissed, "Not threaten. I came to sort this out. You are a daughter-in-law. How dare you pull a stunt like this? Who the hell do you think we are?" Uncle Mike, standing right behind her, added fuel to the fire. A married woman clinging to her money like it's her lifeblood. People like that only think about themselves. Aunt Kathy chimed in with a nasty sneer. She makes a few bucks and suddenly thinks she's the Queen of Sheba. She treats her husband's family like dirt. Ian smirked, looking me up and down like a piece of defective merchandise. "If you're going to act like a boss lady, then act like a boss lady all the way. Don't leave people starving on a holiday." I listened to them, and oddly enough, the anger evaporated. There was only ice left. a cold clarity that allowed me to study every face, every smirk, every greedy, malicious glare. I didn't engage in a screaming match. I knew that the more I argued, the more ammunition I would give them for their public spectacle. I asked just one question. It was quiet, but sharp as a razor blade. When you guys came down for New Year's, did you bring anything with you? Or were you planning on partying exclusively on my credit card? That question was like pouring salt on an open wound. Uncle Mike shut his mouth. Aunt Kathy went mute. Ian's smirk vanished. Eleanor reacted as if I had physically struck her in a weak spot. Her face turned purple. And she shrieked, her neck veins popping. "Who are you calling freeloaders? Have you completely lost your mind?" I looked at her, entirely unfazed. "I'm just asking about the reality of the situation. If you weren't planning on maxing out my card, why did you call me 100 times and drag your entire extended family to my parents' lawn?" Eleanor shrieked again and jabbed a finger at me, shaking with fury. "Unlock the card right now, or you can forget the address to our house," I answered briefly, without raising my voice, but with absolute finality. "I am currently standing in my parents' house. You already kicked me out of the other one?" Eleanor paused for a fraction of a second, then pivoted to my parents, as if trying to recruit them as allies. "Do you see this? Your daughter! She despises her husband's family! She wants us to starve to death." My dad clenched his fists. His voice was low, but heavy as a boulder. "Eleanor, you drive up here on New Year's Eve and throw a tantrum in my driveway. You are not humiliating my daughter. You are humiliating my family." Eleanor curled her lip. "If you're going to defend her, then you can feed her, because she's trying to steal all our property for herself." At that exact moment, Aaron stepped forward. He pulled a folded piece of paper out of his coat pocket and held it out to me. His voice was artificially calm, like a man offering a totally reasonable compromise. "Here, this is an agreement stating you voluntarily assume the financial responsibilities for the household. Just sign it, and we can resolve this peacefully. Let's not start the new year with a war." I stared at the piece of paper, and my heart slammed against my ribs. Not out of fear, out of realization. Asterisk. This was premeditated. Asterisk. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst of anger. They had pre-written a script. Kick me out so I wouldn't be in the way. Confiscate the card so they could drain my account. And when the card got locked, show up and blackmail me into signing a legally binding financial agreement. I didn't take the paper. I looked straight at Aaron, my voice dropping below freezing. "You brought a printed contract. That means you admit that on the 29th, you kicked me out. And on the 31st, you drove here to coerce me into signing this. You think this is just family business where you can do whatever the hell you want." Aaron opened his mouth to reply, but I cut him off, dropping my words like the bang of a gavel. "I am calling the police to witness this." The air in the yard froze. Eleanor was stunned into silence for a second, before screaming as if she'd been burned. "How dare you!" I locked eyes with her, not blinking. I dare, because I have absolutely nothing left to lose. The moment I said I was calling the police, I saw Eleanor falter, but she quickly reverted to her default setting attack by screaming. "You would dare disgrace our family?" Calling the cops on New Year's Eve is a sin. Uncle Mike, Aunt Kathy, and Ian instantly started buzzing like a hive of disturbed bees. Someone muttered that a woman shouldn't be this stubborn. Someone else whispered that you don't blow things out of proportion on a holiday. I looked at each of them, then back at my parents standing behind me. My mom's eyes were full of anxiety and hurt. My dad was flushed with anger, but he was holding his ground. In that moment, I knew. If I showed even a fraction of an inch of weakness, they would bulldoze right over me. And if I let them say whatever they wanted, my parents would be the ones left feeling humiliated. I absolutely could not allow that to happen. Never. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, right in front of them, hiding nothing. I opened the voice memo app, made sure the screen was glowing bright, and said clearly, not loudly, but with iron resolve. "For the record, I have started recording. Whoever has something to say it clearly so there are no lies later about me making things up. Eleanor visibly recoiled. She screamed, sounding genuinely offended. Whose house do you think you're in, recording people? Do you have zero respect for your elders? I looked her dead in the eye. Cold and steady. This is my parents' house. You are standing on someone else's property. Screaming. I have the right to protect myself. Eleanor gasped, but tried to salvage her dominance. I am your mother-in-law. I came here to have a conversation. I gave a slight nod. Then let's converse. With a recording, it's even better. If you're telling the truth, what do you have to fear? I turned my attention to Aaron, completely ignoring his mother. I knew the root of the rot was this man, standing between two fires, believing his cowardice would absolve him of responsibility. I asked point blank, in front of my parents and his relatives, repeat it. Who called me an outsider on December 29th? Who told me to leave my credit card for convenience? Aaron looked like a deer in headlights. His eyes darted from his mother to the snow on the driveway. He stammered, trying to deflect. Lauren, come on. Let's not dig up the past. It's New Year's. I shut him down instantly. There is no past or present. There is only truth and lies. Eleanor instantly threw herself in front of her son to protect him. I said that because the condo was too cramped. The relatives were coming. It would have been uncomfortable for the daughter-in-law. I turned to her and asked a single question that completely silenced her. If the condo was so cramped, how did 3 relatives fit? But the daughter-in-law had to be thrown out. For a second, there was a deafening silence. Aunt Kathy looked away. Uncle Mike rubbed the back of his neck. I didn't give them a second to recover. I opened my banking app and turned the screen around to show my parents. They didn't need to understand the complex financials. They just needed to see the truth. I pointed to the authorized users section, where it clearly showed the card status as times-locked asterisk, and said loudly, Mom, Dad, look, a secondary card under my name was issued and has been heavily used. I never gave it to anyone, except my husband. I turned back to Eleanor and asked bluntly, You had this card, Eleanor. She flinched, but still tried to spin it. I took it to prep for the holidays. I was buying groceries for the house. I nodded. No smirk, no mockery. Just a brutal, factual statement. No. You took it to buy whatever the hell you wanted and force me to foot the bill. You didn't ask me. You didn't notify me. You didn't get my consent. You treated my bank account as your personal entitlement. Eleanor opened her mouth to argue, but the words died in her throat, because it was the absolute, undeniable truth. I turned my focus back to Aaron. I opened the text message with his threat and held the screen up for my parents and the entire mob to see. Asterisk. If you don't unlock the card, Mom is going to drive to your parents' house and make a massive scene. Asterisk. I looked him in the eye. My voice wasn't loud, but every word was a nail in the coffin. Who exactly are you trying to scare? Aaron went pale. He started mumbling. I just wanted you to pick up the phone so we could fix this. I didn't mean. I kept going, refusing to let him squirm out of it. Fix it? By dragging your mother here to scream in my parents' faces? By bringing a printed contract and trying to force me to sign it? Aaron was utterly speechless. My dad, standing right behind me, spoke in a low, gravelly voice. Young man, you are a husband, and you allow yourself to speak to your wife this way, and then you bring your relatives to my property. Do you think my home is a circus tent? Aaron dropped his head, completely incapable of making eye contact with my father. The 3 relatives visibly deflated. Uncle Mike mumbled, Look, let's just be reasonable. It's the holidays. Aunt Kathy also softened her tone. Yeah, why the recording? This is taking it too far. I looked at them and said it straight. I don't want a scene, but I demand the truth. Whoever said it and whoever did it needs to own up to it. Eleanor, sensing that her backup was wavering, instantly shifted gears. She began to play the victim. She started hyperventilating and crying. "You're doing this just to humiliate your husband's family. You want all my relatives to laugh at me." I replied instantly, with razor precision. "It's only humiliation if I'm lying. And I am providing the proof." I pointed to my phone. "The text messages are here. The credit card history is here. The 100 missed calls are here. Eleanor, Aaron, stop trying to paint the truth as my hallucination." I looked dead at Eleanor and delivered the kill shot, cutting off every possible avenue of escape. "From the exact moment you brought these people to my parents' property to coerce me into signing a legal document, this stopped being a family dispute. This is extortion." My mom, standing on the porch, let out a quiet sob, not out of fear, but out of absolute heartbreak. I heard her gasp, and my chest tightened, but I did not allow myself to soften. I knew that if I yielded now, they would use my parents' tears as leverage against me. The tension in the cold air was so thick you could practically hear the hum of the streetlights. Eleanor stared at me for a long time, and then, suddenly, she stopped screaming. She dropped her voice and offered a faint smile. It was a chilling, reptilian smile that made the hairs on my arms stand up. She tilted her head and delivered a single, venomous sentence. "Do you really think that locking a credit card means you won? I will find a way to leave you with absolutely nothing." I stood perfectly still, maintaining eye contact. Only one thought ran through my mind. Asterisk. She just officially declared war. Asterisk. And when someone like her has the audacity to say that out loud, it means there is something much larger at play than just a threat. Having delivered her final line, Eleanor spun on her heel and marched toward the SUV, dragging her entourage behind her with the swagger of a victor. I was left standing in the driveway of my childhood home, feeling as though a heavy iron vault door had just slammed shut behind me. Just before getting into the car, she turned around and hissed through her teeth, half threat, half curse. "I didn't want to start the new year on a bad note. But remember, you chose this path yourself." Aunt Kathy and Uncle Mike didn't say another word. They actively avoided making eye contact with me. It was the classic behavior of people who realize they've just become accomplices to something very dirty, but are desperately pretending they had nothing to do with it. Ian muttered something under his breath and practically jogged to the car, as if terrified of staying a second longer. Aaron was the last to leave. He paused by the gate, glancing nervously at the neighboring houses, terrified someone was watching, and said quietly, "Lauren, don't take this too far. Mom is not going to let this go." I looked at him. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was just infinitely exhausted. I said, very quietly but very clearly, "You chose her side a long time ago." Aaron wanted to respond, but the words choked in his throat. He turned around and got into the driver's seat. The engine roared, and the SUV sped off, leaving behind a ringing, freezing silence. My mom sank into one of the porch chairs and, wiping her tears, tried to offer a brave smile. "Well, sweetheart, it's New Year's. Try not to let it get to you." My dad didn't say anything. He just slowly slid the deadbolt closed on the gate, walked back up the driveway, and gave me a long, searching look. His gaze caused me physical pain, not because he was judging me, but because I knew he was blaming himself. Asterisk. When I gave her away at the wedding, I didn't see what kind of people they truly were. Asterisk. I stood there, forcing myself to look calm for my parents' sake. But when I finally went into my bedroom and shut the door, I realized my hands were freezing cold. The chill wasn't from the Chicago winter. It was from pure dread. Eleanor's phrase kept hammering inside my skull like a metronome. Asterisk. I will find a way to leave you with absolutely nothing. Asterisk. When a person like her says something like that, it's not an empty threat. On the night of January 1st, when everyone else in the house was dead asleep, I lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The ticking of the wall clock sounded deafening. I tried to rationalize. Asterisk. What can they actually do? Scream? Make a scene? I have the recordings, the texts. It's fine. Asterisk. But the more I tried to soothe myself, the more my gut told me something was deeply wrong. Eleanor wasn't the type to surrender just because a credit card got declined. To her, that card was a scepter of power. By taking it, I had stripped her of her ability to control the family. And when people lose power, they take desperate measures. I remembered the way she talked about money, how her eyes gleamed at any financial opportunity. I remembered how, a few months ago, Aaron had asked me for copies of my IDs and the condo deed, claiming it was for updating the utility accounts with the new HOA management. I had handed them over without a second thought. I trusted my husband. Asterisk God. What an absolute idiot I was. Asterisk. The morning of January 1st. Before I had even washed my face, an alert popped up on my phone from Experian and my bank. One line of text made my stomach drop through the floor. Asterisk. Credit inquiry alert. Status update on home equity line of credit. Application. Collateral property assessment initiated. Asterisk. I froze. What HELOC? I hadn't applied for a loan. I opened the notification and read the details. There was an application number, a reference code, and the words that sent ice through my veins. Asterisk collateral property. Asterisk. I instantly thought of the condo, because that was the only major asset legally tied to both me and Aaron. I collapsed onto the bed. My hands were violently shaking. The room started to spin. The phrase times leave you with absolutely nothing. Time suddenly took on a terrifying, concrete form. This wasn't a threat anymore. It was a knife being driven into my back. I pulled up my bank accounts, checking every single transaction, scouring the credit monitoring dashboards, desperate to find a trace. The funds hadn't been deposited yet, but that offered zero comfort. Working in banking, I knew the schemes. The money doesn't have to hit your account. If the documents are filed under your name and your home is leveraged as collateral, the trap is already sprung. I pictured bank appraisers knocking on my door, showing up with clipboards to evaluate my home. My throat constricted. I immediately dialed Aaron. It rang. Once, twice, then sent to voicemail. I called again. Ignored. I called Eleanor. Sent to voicemail. I texted Aaron. Asterisk explain this loan application right now. Asterisk delivered. Unread. I texted again. Asterisk. If you don't answer, I am calling the bank's fraud department. Asterisk. Silence. That silence was infinitely more terrifying than Eleanor's screaming, because it was the silence of a man trying to hide a crime he had already committed. During the day on January 1st, I forced myself to sit at the table and eat with my parents. I tried to smile so they wouldn't panic, but inside, I was pulled as tight as a piano wire. I sat there listening for my phone, feeling like it could detonate at any second with a new, even more catastrophic notification. By evening, a message popped up in my condo building's WhatsApp group. A neighbor wrote, Asterisk. Hey, did someone at Unit 4B order an appraisal? Some weird guys were out in the hall with clipboards claiming they were from a valuation firm. They were knocking on the door and asking questions. Asterisk. Reading that, I felt a paralyzing chill shoot from the base of my skull to my heels. Asterisk. Valuation. Firm. Asterisk. The exact phrase I was terrified of. They had brought appraisers to my home. That meant the application wasn't a glitch. It was real. It was in processing, and if I was even one step behind, they would successfully transform me into the crazy daughter-in-law who locked her credit card and ran away, only to legally saddle me with a massive debt I never agreed to. I sat in my childhood bedroom with the door locked, listening to the muffled pops of fireworks outside. People were ringing in the new year, and I was sitting on a ticking time bomb. I opened my laptop and compiled every single file. The audio recording, the text messages, the authorized user card history, the Experian alerts, the WhatsApp screenshot from the neighbor. I took screenshots of everything, dumped them into an encrypted folder, and emailed a copy to myself, just in case something happened to my phone. I never, ever imagined I would have to live like this. But I understood that when you are dealing with manipulative predators, evidence is your only armor. And I realized an even more bitter truth. The trap wasn't set by strangers. It was set by my husband and his mother. I wasn't afraid of their anger anymore. I was afraid of being played for a fool again. And this time, I decided to walk straight into the lion's den. On the morning of January 2nd, while the streets were still quiet with people recovering from the holidays, I got up before dawn. I couldn't stomach food. I drank a glass of water just to ground myself. I threw on my winter coat and grabbed a manila folder with my documents. It was physically light, but it felt like an anvil on my soul. My mom looked at me, deeply concerned. "Where are you going looking like that, Lauren?" I took her hand and said softly, "I have an errand I need to run." "Mom, don't worry. I know exactly what I'm doing." My dad didn't ask for details. He just stood up, put a hand on my shoulder, and said in a low voice, "If you need me, call. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Those words warmed my chest, but they were also a stark reminder. I had zero margin for error. A mistake today would cost me my home, my credit score, and potentially the rest of my financial life. I drove straight to the downtown branch of the bank where I used to work. I knew their protocols inside and out. I knew exactly how their compliance and fraud departments operated. I walked in calmly. No screaming, no drama. I walked straight up to a desk banker and laid out the facts. I need to pull all pending records regarding collateral assets tied to my name and my husband's name. I received a credit alert regarding a HELOC application, but I never signed any loan documents. The young banker hesitated. It was the day after New Year's, and the branch was operating on a skeleton crew. But seeing my absolute dead-eyed certainty and the thick folder of documents, she asked me to wait and went to get the branch manager. A few minutes later, the manager came out. I gave him the short version. The condo is a jointly owned asset. I suspect my signature was forged. He didn't make any promises. Maintaining strict professional detachment. Please provide the application number from the alert you received. I showed him the code on my phone screen. He typed it into his terminal, reviewed the screen, and then looked back at me. His expression shifted. He seemed to realize this wasn't just a marital misunderstanding. He spoke slowly. "There is an active application. It includes a spousal consent form." My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my composure. "Show me the signature." When the scanned PDF loaded on his monitor, I stared at the signature hovering above my printed name. At first glance, it looked incredibly close, so close that a random notary or underwriter would probably rubber stamp it. But I had been signing financial documents with that exact signature for a decade. I knew my handwriting the way I knew my own breathing. This signature was a painstakingly careful imitation, but it lacked my muscle memory. I always looped the L in my name with a fast, fluid, sweeping motion. Here, the line was jagged, like someone slowly tracing the letter. The pressure at the end of my signature was always heavy because of the way I grip a pen. Here, the ink pressure was uniformly light. I stared at it for a few seconds, then looked up and stated as a hard fact, "That is not my signature." The manager paused. "Are you absolutely certain?" I nodded. My voice was titanium. "I am certain. And I can prove it. I need the exact date and time those documents were supposedly signed and notarized." When he read off the date and timestamp, a cold shiver ran down my spine, but instantly, everything clicked into place. On that exact day, I was at a mandatory corporate retreat in downtown Chicago. I had badge swipe records. I pulled out my phone, opened my corporate calendar, found the itinerary, and swiped to a photo of me presenting at a seminar with a timestamp in the metadata. I slid my phone across the desk and said clearly, "On that day, at that exact time, I was 2 hours away at a corporate event. I have undeniable proof The manager looked at the screen, then at me, and nodded. His tone shifted to dead serious. He stopped telling me to stay calm. He spoke like a man who realized the bank was staring down the barrel of a federal fraud case. I didn't wait for him to suggest the next steps. I executed the plan I had formulated the night before. First, I am officially filing an affidavit of forgery. I demand an immediate freeze on this application and a hard lock on the deed to prevent any encumbrance due to suspected identity theft and wire fraud. I need a stamped copy of this affidavit before I leave this desk. I kept emotion entirely out of it. Just cold facts. Asterisk. I did not sign. I did not consent. Halt processing immediately. Asterisk. Second, I need you to escalate this to your internal fraud investigations unit right now to establish a paper trail. I didn't need the bank's emotional support. I needed their rigid bureaucracy. Because a bureaucratic paper trail is the one thing a gaslighting mother-in-law cannot scream her way out of. Only when the manager handed me a date-stamped, signed copy of my affidavit did my heart finally stop hammering against my ribs. I walked out of the bank and stood on the concrete steps. The morning of January 2nd was bright and freezing. I pulled out my phone and sent Aaron one single text message. No emotion, no long paragraphs, just a lethal warning. Asterisk. I know exactly what you tried to do with the condo. I have the proof. Do not force me to turn this into a federal criminal case. Asterisk. I hit send. My hand was still shaking slightly, but this time, it wasn't out of fear. It was the adrenaline of knowing I was finally holding the executioner's axe. Less than 2 minutes later, Aaron called. His voice was frantic, hoarse, completely stripped of the arrogant, threatening tone he had used on New Year's Eve. Lo, please, don't blow this out of proportion. Mom said it was just a temporary line of credit so we could throw a proper New Year's party. We were going to pay it right back after the holidays. I heard that and I actually laughed. A quiet, terrifyingly cold laugh. A temporary line of credit? That required you to commit felony forgery? Aaron went dead silent. Over the phone, I distinctly heard him swallow hard. Then he whispered, practically begging, "Come home. Let's talk about this. Please don't do this," I answered sharply. If we are talking facts. Who forged the signature? Who brought the paperwork? Who filed the application? Aaron stammered. I don't know, Mom said. I cut him off. You don't know? But you managed to bring a printed financial agreement to my parents' house to try and blackmail me into signing away my rights. Stop playing the idiot. Before I even hung up, a text popped up from an old work friend who lived in my building. Just one sentence, but it was the final puzzle piece that snapped everything into place. Asterisk. Hey. Word on the street is, your mother-in-law was bragging to the HOA board that they are hosting a massive catered banquet and bought thousands in gifts. Said she found a new funding source. Asterisk. Reading that, my throat tightened. Asterisk. The funding source was me. Asterisk. When I locked the credit card, they didn't cancel their insane party. They didn't abandon their precious image. They simply pivoted to a larger, more permanent funding source. My home equity. The entire movie played out in my head, crystal clear. Kick me out so I'm not around to see the mail. Bring the relatives as an excuse for the spending spree. Steal the backup credit card for unchecked access. When the card gets locked, instantly execute Plan B. Forge a signature and pull a HELOC against the condo. It wasn't a spontaneous crime of opportunity. It was a calculated, premeditated heist. I stood there, watching people walk down the street in the freezing cold, and I felt an overwhelming sense of tranquility, because when you finally understand the rules of the game you're being forced to play, you are no longer the victim. I sent Aaron one final, non-negotiable text. Asterisk tonight, January 2nd, 7 p.m. Be at the condo. Have your mother and your 3 relatives there. I am going to have one conversation with all of you. With witnesses. Asterisk. I didn't wait for a reply. I locked my phone, took a deep breath of the freezing air, and smiled. Not the strained, exhausted smile of a tolerant wife, but the smile of a woman holding a royal flush, and I knew that the second I walked through the door of that condo, someone's life was going to be destroyed. I arrived at the condo at exactly 7 p.m. Not a minute early, not a minute late. I wanted them to The moment I unlocked the door, the smell of expensive catered food hit me. But the atmosphere in the condo was like a morgue. They were all gathered in the living room, staged like a kangaroo court waiting for the defendant. Eleanor sat dead center on the sofa, her back rigid, her chin tilted up arrogantly, the presiding judge. Uncle Mike, Aunt Kathy, and Ian flanked her on the armchairs. Their eyes darted around, full of nosy curiosity and underlying panic. Aaron stood behind his mother's shoulder, his hands clasped tight. His face was pulled as taut as a guitar string. I pulled out a dining chair, sat directly across from them, and placed my manila folder on the coffee table. I set my phone next to it, screen facing up, a silent reminder. I hadn't come to absorb their insults. I came to lay out the evidence. Eleanor fired the first shot. Her voice was dripping with moral superiority, thinly veiling her rage. So, you came back. Good. Unlock the app right now. We took out that loan for the needs of this family. I looked right at her. I didn't defend myself. I didn't justify my actions. I delivered one sentence. I didn't come back to unlock a credit card. I came back to ask which one of you committed felony forgery. The silence that followed was absolute. Aunt Kathy froze with a coffee mug halfway to her mouth. Uncle Mike scowled. Aaron physically flinched. His eyes darted around the room as if I had just stabbed him. Uncle Mike let out a scoff, trying to project machismo. Listen to the daughter-in-law, acting like she's the FBI. I locked eyes with him. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut glass. I'm not the FBI. I am the homeowner. And I have every right to know who is trying to drag me into a federal wire fraud investigation. Saying that, I flipped open the folder, pulled out the bank's documentation, and tossed the copies onto the coffee table. I slid the page with the signature block toward them, tapped the forged ink, and said slowly and distinctly, "That is not my signature." Aaron panicked and lunged forward. His voice cracked. "Lauren, stop talking crazy." I didn't even blink in his direction. I interrogated him like a hostile witness. "When did you sign this? Where? Who notarized it?" Aaron stammered, opened his mouth, closed it again. The textbook behavior of a coward cornered by reality. Eleanor instantly threw herself into the line of fire to shield her son. Her voice turned shrill. "He signed it for you. A husband and wife can sign things for each other. What is the big deal?" I looked at her. No smile, no irony. I dropped the hammer. "You can sign for each other if you have a legally binding power of attorney. What you did is a felony." Aunt Kathy's face lost all its color. She looked at Uncle Mike, her eyes wide with terror, silently asking if I was telling the truth. Ian sat up straight, all his frat boy arrogance instantly vaporizing. Eleanor, realizing the dynamic was shifting, slammed her palm down on the coffee table. "You are blowing this out of proportion. I will make sure you have no home to come back to." Her voice escalated into a shriek. She was trying to drown out the truth with decibels, but her screaming didn't work on me anymore. I spoke coldly, slowing down so every syllable would penetrate her skull. "My home is with my parents, but in this time's home, I am the one who decides who gets to stay." Eleanor's eyes bulged out of her head. "How dare you?" I nodded. "I dare. Because if this gets approved, I'm the one who goes bankrupt." Aaron stepped forward, hands raised, trying to pacify me. "Lauren, calm down. Let's just handle this like adults." I shut him down instantly. "You lost the right to tell me to calm down the second you allowed my identity to be stolen. And then, I played my trump card, the one that guaranteed they would never sleep peacefully again." I pulled the date-stamped affidavit of forgery from the bank and dropped it on the table, pointing to the official bank seal. "I filed an official fraud affidavit with the bank this morning, halting all transactions." The fraud investigation unit will be calling today to verify. All the blood drained from Aaron's face. He looked like a ghost. The three relatives started exchanging terrified glances. They suddenly realized that if this was officially documented as forgery, they weren't sitting in the middle of a family squabble, they were sitting in the middle of a crime scene. Eleanor tried desperately to maintain her grip on reality, but her voice wavered. What do you mean, a fraud affidavit? We took that money for the family, and you are destroying this house over it. I looked at her and asked the question that exposed the entire rot of their existence. Eleanor, you kicked me out because the condo was too cramped, but somehow there was plenty of room for three relatives. So tell me, did you kick out your daughter-in-law, or did you just kick out the obstacle to the ATM? That sentence ripped the masks off every single one of them. Aunt Kathy stared at the floor. Uncle Mike rubbed his hands together nervously, completely unable to look at me. Ian swallowed hard, his eyes glued to the front door, as if calculating the quickest escape route. The air in the room felt thick enough to choke on. Eleanor pressed her lips together so hard they turned white. Her jaw trembled. Aaron stood there paralyzed, his eyes begging me to stop while simultaneously radiating sheer terror. I didn't say another word. I just sat there and waited. And right on cue, my phone vibrated. An unknown 1 to 800 number flashed on the screen. I stared at it for a second, hit accept, and put it on speakerphone at max volume. A crisp, professional corporate voice filled the dead silence of the living room. Lauren Lawson? This is the Fraud Investigations Unit at Bank Name. We are calling to formally verify your affidavit. Can you confirm for a recorded line that the signature on the HELOC application submitted on December 30th was not authorized by you? The entire room stopped breathing. Eleanor opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Aaron was frozen in place, looking like a deer staring down in one eight-wheeler. The three relatives held their breath. Absolute panic written across their faces. I looked around the room, let my eyes rest on the forged documents on the table, and my voice rang out cold and clear. I confirm. I did not sign those documents. The moment the words left my mouth, there was a brief pause on the line, followed by the investigator's decisive response. Understood. We have recorded your statement. Please be prepared to cooperate with our internal investigators and potentially law enforcement as we draft the formal referral for identity theft and wire fraud. I answered without hesitation. I agree to fully cooperate. I reiterate my demand to freeze all equity transfers and lock the deed immediately. When the call disconnected, it was as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. There are certain things that can be swept under the rug as long as they stay within the confines of a screaming match. But the second words, like Times law enforcement, identity theft, asterisk, and Times wire fraud times, are spoken on a recorded bank line. All the screaming in the world becomes meaningless white noise. Aaron instinctively lunged forward, trying to grab my phone off the table, as if physically taking the device could somehow rewind time. I stepped back, clutching the phone, looked him dead in the eye, and delivered a warning made of ice. Touch my phone, and I will add assault and evidence tampering to the police report. Aaron froze. His hand hung suspended in midair. He looked like a man who finally realized he was standing at the edge of a cliff and the ground had just crumbled beneath him. Eleanor, her face shifting from pale white to a violently mottled red, turned on Aaron, unleashing all her venom on him. How could you let this happen? I told you to handle this quietly. That phrase, Times handle this quietly times, was a confession broadcast to the entire room. They didn't feel guilty for committing fraud. They only felt guilty that they got caught. For the first time in his life, Aaron snapped. But it was the pathetic explosion of a weak man trying to run from the consequences. He whipped his head toward me and snarled, "This is all your fault. You locked the credit card. That's why this happened. If you had just unlocked the app, none of this would have been necessary." I locked eyes with him, refusing to let him gaslight his way out. Do not blame me for your felonies. You forged my name. You created this disaster. Aaron tried to yell back, but the words choked him. He knew I was right, and the three relatives sitting on the couches were looking at him with entirely different eyes, the eyes of people desperate to avoid going down on a sinking ship. Eleanor, seeing her son backed into a corner, immediately deployed her final weapon, playing the hysterical victim. "You are doing this to destroy this family. You want me to die of a heart attack? To do this during the holidays. Are you even human?" I didn't let her emotionally manipulate the room. I opened my voice memo app, found the recording from New Year's Eve, and blasted it at max volume. Eleanor's shrill, panicked voice echoed off the walls. Asterisk. "The card is declined. We're standing in the middle of Whole Foods. People are staring. It's the ultimate humiliation. How are we supposed to feed the guests?" Asterisk. Everyone froze. Aunt Kathy dropped her head into her hands. Uncle Mike swallowed hard. Ian looked at the ceiling, desperately wishing he was anywhere else. I paused the recording and spoke slowly, letting every word hit like a sledgehammer. "That is why you tried to mortgage my house. Not to save the family. To fund a dinner party." Eleanor opened her mouth to scream again, but the sound died in her throat. The facade she had spent her entire life meticulously crafting had just been obliterated by her own recorded voice. Aunt Kathy finally cracked. Real fear took over. She threw her hands up, her voice trembling. "All right, enough. Please, it's New Year's. Don't drag the police into this. Your family, just work it out privately," Uncle Mike muttered, practically crawling backward into his chair. "We just came for the holidays. We didn't know anything about forged documents." Ian sat rigid as a board, his eyes locked on the front door. He looked ready to bolt. I looked at them. My voice was completely flat. "I'm not dragging anyone into anything. I am simply following the law. Whoever broke it, pays for it." I said it not to terrorize them, but to break their conditioning. They were used to a dynamic where, if they screamed, people caved. If they pressured, people yielded. Eleanor, sensing her relatives actively abandoning her, desperately shifted tactics again. She clutched her chest, her voice straining as if she were on the verge of tears. "I did everything to maintain the image of this family. Did anyone think of me?" The guests were arriving. "Was I supposed to feed them cheap hot dogs and let them mock us?" I looked at her without an ounce of pity. I delivered one short sentence that made her freeze completely. "You can't buy prestige with your daughter-in-law's stolen credit." Eleanor went entirely rigid. She stared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. But this time, her glare didn't scare me. I finally understood her. Maintaining the illusion of wealth was more important to her than the truth, and that was exactly why she was capable of doing absolutely anything. My phone buzzed again. A text alert from the bank. Asterisk. Notice. Mandatory in-person identity verification and fraud review scheduled for tomorrow at 9 a.m. Asterisk. I left the phone face up on the coffee table so everyone could see the official bank logo. Aaron saw it, and total, absolute panic set in. He took a step toward me, his voice cracking. "Cancel it, Lo. I'm begging you. Please." I looked at him with such intense calm that he physically recoiled. "You shouldn't be begging me, Aaron. You should be begging a defense attorney." Hearing that, Eleanor shrieked. "Are you a complete psychopath? Are you trying to put my son in a cage?" I answered, enunciating every syllable. "You put yourselves in a cage, not me." The atmosphere in the room had moved past a domestic dispute. It was the complete collapse of a regime. The three relatives were practically shrinking into the furniture, their body language screaming their desire to detach from Eleanor. They were no longer the aggressive mob that showed up at my parents' house. They smelled federal charges, and they wanted out. I looked dead at Aaron and delivered the final blow. No yelling. Just a brutal truth. You chose to hide behind your mother's skirt your entire marriage. Now, you can hide behind the consequences. Aaron froze. Eleanor froze. Because for the very first time in their lives, they realized that the woman they had treated as an ATM was never going to let them use her again. The morning of January 3rd, I drove back to the bank for the mandatory fraud review. The Chicago winter air was biting, but the sun was blindingly bright. I didn't go alone. My dad came with me. He wore his old, heavy winter coat. He walked slowly, but his posture was ramrod straight. He barely said a word. He was just there, anchoring me. I looked at him, and my chest felt incredibly warm, yet aching. Warm, because I finally had someone standing beside me. Aching, because if I hadn't spent years trying to handle a toxic marriage all by myself, I might have avoided this nightmare entirely. We were escorted into an office with one of the bank's internal legal investigators. The vibe here was light years away from the screaming matches in the condo. In this room, reality was dictated by ink, notarizations, and federal regulations. I handed over my original IDs and laid out the facts one more time. Asterisk, I did not sign. I suspect forgery. I demand a hard freeze on the asset. Asterisk. The investigator nodded, his demeanor clinical. We have your affidavit on file. We asked you to come in today because during our initial review of the HELOC application, we flagged some irregularities in the supplemental disclosures attached to the deed. Hearing Times supplemental disclosures asterisk, my stomach dropped again. I knew Eleanor's trap probably had multiple layers. The investigator opened a file folder, leafed through some documents, and slid a copy of a legal contract across the desk. I had never seen it in my life. The header read, Asterisk Declaration of Trust and Down Payment Gift Addendum. Asterisk. I stared at my name, Aaron's name, and then my eyes locked onto a specific clause regarding the origin of the funds used to purchase the condo. And in that exact second, a memory hit me like a freight train. I remembered the week we closed on the house. My parents had wired me a massive sum of money, telling me, this is so you always have a safety net, and ordered me to keep a specific set of closing documents safe. I had listened, but I never truly understood the legal weight of what they had done. The investigator spoke slowly and deliberately. This addendum, filed at closing, explicitly states that a significant percentage of the equity in the property was provided by your parents as a conditional family trust. I slowly turned my head and looked at my dad. He didn't look away. He let out a slow breath and said, with total, unshakable calm, yes, that's correct. We funded the majority of the down payment. My throat closed up. Dad, why didn't I know the specifics of this? My dad looked at me, his eyes full of both deep love and deep sorrow. Because we love you, Lauren. So we built a firewall. It just breaks my heart that we actually needed it. Those words were a gentle, sobering slap to the face. I sat there completely stunned, not by the money, but by the realization that my parents had seen the predators circling long before I was willing to open my eyes. Human nature is sometimes vastly more cruel than we want to believe. The investigator pointed his pen at the most critical clause in the document. It clearly outlined that the funds provided by my parents were a targeted financial gift with strict stipulations. In the event of marital financial fraud, forged encumbrances, or financial abuse by the spouse's family, that initial equity percentage was legally protected as a separate asset, shielding it from being liquidated by the husband or his creditors. I read the legal jargon, and my hands went ice cold. I wasn't a lawyer, but working in banking, I understood exactly what it meant. My parents had quietly installed a titanium vault door around my financial future, one that Eleanor and Aaron had absolutely no idea existed. The investigator looked at me and concluded in a monotone voice. Based on the evidence you've provided, the verified timestamp discrepancy, and this trust addendum, we are officially flagging the application for suspected fraud. The HELOC process is permanently halted pending a full legal review. Hearing the word times halted asterisk, I finally exhaled a breath I felt like I'd been holding for a year. They didn't get the money. But I knew times halted, times wasn't the end. It was just a tactical pause. Now, I needed to bring the architects of this disaster into a room where they couldn't scream their way out of reality. I pulled out my phone and sent Aaron a short, chilling text. Asterisk. Bring your mother to the bank. Downtown branch. Right now. There is something she needs to see. Asterisk. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I knew that the more words I gave him, the more time he had to invent a lie. 10 minutes later, Aaron called. His voice was a panicked whisper. Lauren, where are you? At the bank. With the legal team. Bring your mother. Aaron went silent. I heard him hyperventilating. Then he whispered, Don't do this. I rolled my eyes. Asterisk. Don't do this? Asterisk. Forging a signature to steal a house is fine, but me defending myself is taking it too far? About 40 minutes later, Eleanor strutted into the bank lobby. Even now, she maintained her arrogant swagger. She marched right up to the glass office and announced loudly, I am his mother. I call the shots in our family. But this wasn't her living room. The investigator didn't even blink. He delivered one quiet, devastating sentence that instantly put her in her place. Ma'am, this is a federally regulated financial matter regarding real estate. A mother has zero legal standing in this office. Eleanor froze in her tracks, her face flushing crimson. Aaron stood behind her, incapable of making eye contact with me. I didn't waste time. I slid the Times. Declaration of Trust Times, copy across the table directly in front of her. Read it, Eleanor. She snatched the paper, her eyes darting over the legal text. As she read, the blood rapidly drained from her face. Her hands began to shake violently. All the aggressive, finger-pointing confidence she had displayed in my parents' driveway vanished into thin air. I looked at Aaron, and with a quiet, lethal sarcasm, asked, I thought you told her it was your Times house? Eleanor whipped her head around to glare at Aaron. Her eyes were burning with sheer rage. You told me this was your house! You told me her name was just on the deed for show! Aaron was utterly mute. The pathetic silence of a man who had spent years bragging about his status, only to be publicly obliterated by the truth. I stood up, looked directly at Eleanor, and without raising my voice, let every word echo off the cold glass walls of the office. Eleanor, you kicked me out of my own home, but you forgot one crucial detail. You never had the right to kick anyone out to begin with. I genuinely thought that after the brutal reality check at the bank, Eleanor would finally comprehend the situation and back off. But I severely underestimated a toxic narcissist's wounded ego, especially when mixed with sheer greed. She was not going to surrender. As we walked out of the bank lobby, she shot me a long, venomous glare. She turned to Aaron and hissed, loud enough for me to hear perfectly. When we get back to the condo, I am going to make her life a living hell. I didn't reply. I just tightened my grip on my folder of documents, feeling like a soldier holding a shield against a barrage of arrows. My dad walked beside me, his pace slow but steady. He didn't tell me what to do, but he didn't coddle me either. He was just a silent anchor, reminding me, asterisk, your family has your back. Do not flinch. Asterisk. Later that afternoon, while I was back at my parents' house in the suburbs, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a frantic 100 call barrage like New Year's Eve. It was a notification from the condo building's WhatsApp group, a neighbor wrote. Asterisk. Hey, does anyone know why there's so much screaming coming from 4B? Someone is yelling about an ungrateful bitch. Asterisk. A minute later, another message. Asterisk. Yeah, I heard the daughter-in-law ran away and locked all the credit cards. The mother-in-law is out in the hallway crying to anyone who will listen about how she's the victim. Asterisk. Reading that, my chest tightened. Eleanor had deployed her ultimate weapon, a smear campaign. Having failed to steal the condo through fraud, she was trying to win the war through public character assassination. She wanted to paint me as a psychotic monster to the entire building, hoping the sheer public humiliation would force me to crawl back, unlock the credit cards, apologize, and accept the status quo. I saw right through her playbook. She didn't care about the truth. She only cared about the narrative. Before I could even process my next move, my friend from down the hall sent me a direct message. Asterisk, Lauren, There's a mob at your door. Your mother-in-law and some relatives are standing in the hallway, practically screaming their version of events to the whole floor. Asterisk. I locked my phone and stood up immediately. My mom looked terrified. Where are you going now? I answered curtly. I have to go back to the city. To the condo. Lauren, please. Mom, don't worry. I have the paperwork. My dad didn't ask questions. He stood up and grabbed his heavy coat. I'm driving. I nodded. This time, I wasn't going into battle alone. When we arrived at the condo floor, the scene was exactly what I had pictured. Standing in front of my door were Eleanor, Aaron, and the three relatives. They had claimed the hallway like a beachhead, loudly broadcasting their tragic tale of woe to anyone who opened their door to look. The second the elevator doors parted and Eleanor saw me step out, she pointed a dramatic finger right at my chest. There she is! Ran away to her mommy and daddy. Caused a massive scene at the bank. And now she wants to throw her own mother-in-law out onto the freezing streets. Uncle Mike and Aunt Kathy instantly murmured their support. Doing this right after the holidays. It's just inhuman. Ian smirked, leaning against the wall, and delivered a smug summary. She can try to kick us out, but she legally can't. We're already established guests. Squatters' rights, basically. That single phrase, meant to be an arrogant threat, accidentally revealed their entire strategy. They had come here to physically occupy the condo, assert tenancy, and make it a legal nightmare for me to evict them from my own property. I didn't argue. I didn't try to defend my honor to the neighbors peeking through their peepholes. I knew that the more I talked, the more oxygen I gave to Eleanor's theatrical performance. I simply opened my manila folder, pulled out the bank's affidavit of forgery and the legal deed, and dialed the number for the building's 24/7 security and HOA management. I spoke loudly and with absolute authority. Hello. I am the legal owner of Unit 4B. Currently, there is an unauthorized group of people loitering in the hallway outside my door, creating a severe public disturbance. Furthermore, they are attempting to assert unauthorized tenancy in my unit. I am requesting security dispatch immediately. And I am prepared to call the Chicago Police Department for trespassing. I hung up and immediately snapped a photo of the group, texting it to the HOA manager's emergency line. Eleanor, seeing that I wasn't engaging in a screaming match but escalating straight to security, started to panic. You think your little tricks are going to work on me? I looked at her with dead eyes. I don't play tricks, Eleanor. I follow the rules. It took less than 5 minutes for 2 building security guards to step off the elevator. They were polite but completely no-nonsense. The head guard looked at the group. Are any of you registered residents of this building? Do you have ID matching this address? The 3 relatives instantly withered. Aunt Kathy stammered, We're just visiting for New Year's. The guard wasn't having it. Building policy requires all overnight guests staying more than 48 hours to be registered with the front desk by the deeded owner. The owner has not registered you. You are trespassing. I need you to vacate the premises. Uncle Mike looked around frantically, his face flushing dark red with embarrassment. Ian slowly pushed himself off the wall, physically backing away from the confrontation. Eleanor tried to intervene, her voice shrill. They are family. What kind of registration do we need? This is ridiculous. The guard stood firm. Ma'am, the HOA rules are the rules. Please cooperate, or I will have CPD escort you out. I stood a few feet away, perfectly silent, letting reality do the heavy lifting. The neighbors, who had been listening to Eleanor's sob story, suddenly realized that this wasn't a tale of an abused mother-in-law. It was a group of hostile squatters trying to steal a woman's home. Eleanor, watching her carefully crafted narrative disintegrate in real time, whipped her head toward Aaron, her eyes burning with fury. Aaron was utterly terrified. He grabbed my arm and pulled me a few steps away, his voice cracking. All his threats had evaporated. Lauren, please, forgive me just this once. Mom is old. Don't call the cops. Don't ruin my life. I looked deep into his eyes and delivered one short, freezing sentence. Being old is not a license to be a criminal, Aaron started shaking. But if you push this all the way with the bank, I'll lose everything, I shot back, keeping my voice low but lethal. You will lose everything because of times. Who asterisk? Aaron. Aaron dropped his head. And in that moment, like a drowning man forced to finally vomit up the water, the truth spilled out. He had dug himself into a massive hole. He had tried to get rich quick, co-signed a disastrous loan for a buddy, and dumped thousands into a crypto scam. He was drowning in debt. He was too cowardly to tell me, so he let his mother run her extortion plays, culminating in forging my signature on a HELOC to pull cash out of the condo to quietly cover his massive financial crater. I stared at him. I didn't scream. I just asked a question that made him freeze. And you were going to use my entire life's savings to pay off your gambling debts? Aaron couldn't answer. Eleanor, catching fragments of his confession, went absolutely ballistic. Right in front of the security guards and the neighbors, she turned on her own son like a rabid dog. You idiot! You humiliated me. I told you to get the money quietly. Now everyone is laughing at us. In that hallway, the facade collapsed. They started eating each other alive. The proud, decent family that cared so deeply about their public image finally showed their true faces. Greed, terror, and a total willingness to throw anyone under the bus to save themselves. I didn't let the circus continue. I pulled a pre-drafted legal separation agreement from my folder. It included a clause demanding Aaron admit to unauthorized use of financial instruments and agree to immediately vacate the primary residence so I could initiate formal divorce and asset division proceedings without interference. I spoke with the cold precision of a surgeon. Sign it, Aaron, right now, so we have a baseline of truth. The longer you drag this out, the worse the federal charges will be. Aaron looked at me with bloodshot eyes, his hands trembling violently, and took my pen. Eleanor lunged at him, trying to snatch the paper away, screaming, "Don't sign anything, I forbid it!" But the security guards immediately stepped in to block her, and my dad stepped forward. His low, booming voice stopped her dead in her tracks. "Do not make this worse for yourself, Eleanor." Eleanor froze, finally realizing that for the first time in her life, screaming wasn't going to get her way. The three relatives realized the ship was officially at the bottom of the ocean. They silently grabbed their duffel bags, refusing to make eye contact with anyone in the hallway. As they shuffled toward the elevator, Aunt Kathy muttered to Eleanor, her voice thick with fear and shame. "Look, Eleanor, we're just gonna head back upstate." Uncle Mike nodded, staring at his shoes. Ian practically sprinted into the elevator car. And then there was only Eleanor. Left standing in the middle of a luxury condo hallway, her face an ashen gray, her lips trembling. The public image she had spent decades ruthlessly defending had just been shattered into a million pieces by her own staggering greed. Looking at her in that moment, I didn't feel an ounce of sadistic joy. I just felt the cold, hollow emptiness of watching a person who had single-handedly built the cage of her own absolute loneliness. After the New Year's disaster, I didn't throw any more scenes, and I didn't make any loud public declarations. I just quietly went to work. Step by step, like a person methodically untangling a knot that had been suffocating them for years. I saw the bank investigation through to the end, finalizing the division of assets based on the ironclad trust document my parents had put in place. I permanently canceled every authorized user card and revoked every implicit financial consent. I never again allowed anyone to use the word family as a crowbar to pry open my wallet. Simultaneously, I filed for divorce. I instructed my lawyer to make it as fast and surgical as possible, not out of vindictive hatred, but out of the profound realization that some relationships are rotten to the core, and trying to salvage them only prolongs your own suffering. Aaron called me countless times. His voice no longer carried any threats or emotional blackmail. He just sounded gravelly and exhausted, like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. I was wrong, Lo. I just thought that if I did what Mom wanted, we'd have peace in the house. I listened to him, and my soul felt completely still. No storm, no rage. I answered calmly, without bitterness. You chose peace with your mother by sacrificing your wife. A long, heavy silence hung over the line. Maybe for the very first time, Aaron realized that his strategy of not picking a side was, in fact, a choice. And he had chosen the wrong side. But a late epiphany doesn't turn back the clock. Eleanor called, too. Her voice was entirely different from the banshee shrieks I had endured in my parents' driveway. She spoke slowly, trying to sound soft and reasonable. I have a temper, Lauren. It was the holidays. I wasn't thinking straight. I listened to her, and I wasn't angry anymore. I just saw right through her. I didn't curse at her, I didn't list her sins, and I didn't throw her awful words back in her face. I just delivered one sentence, as casually as stating the weather. You thought about it perfectly, Eleanor. You calculated every step. She went dead silent. She probably wasn't used to people looking directly into the darkest parts of her soul. She was used to people yielding, tolerating her, and letting her believe her delusions of grandeur. But this time, there was no one left to yield. I started redecorating the condo. For the first time in years, I stood in my own living room and didn't hear commands, passive-aggressive critiques, or other people's decisions echoing off the walls. The condo was no longer loud or packed with people, but strangely, it felt infinitely larger. It felt larger because the suffocating feeling of being a guest in a home I paid for was finally gone. I changed the drapes, rearranged the furniture, and threw out bags of useless junk. As I touched each item, I asked myself, asterisk, am I keeping this because I actually want it, or out of habit? Asterisk. And I realized how much of my life I had held on to simply out of fear of someone else's judgment. I wasn't afraid anymore. I started visiting my parents in the suburbs more often. One evening, sitting on the back porch with a cup of coffee, I finally apologized to them for the nightmare I dragged them into on New Year's Eve. I looked at my mom and said, I'm so sorry I was too blind to see it sooner. My mom just rubbed my arm and smiled her usual, gentle smile. You aren't to blame for believing the best in people, sweetie. The only thing that matters is having the courage to open your eyes when the truth is right in front of you. Those words lifted a crushing weight off my chest. I had been punishing myself for being stupid, for being blind. But it turns out, trusting the person you love isn't a crime. The only thing that matters is having the spine to walk away when the mask finally slips. Sometimes, late at night, I would open my phone and scroll down to the call log from December 31st. A massive, endless wall of red missed calls. Back then, every single vibration felt like a needle in my brain. Now, I looked at it without a trace of anger. I just felt a deep empathy for the woman I used to be, a woman who tried to buy love and maintain a home with endless patience, completely blind to the fact that the people inside that home never actually wanted her there. It's a tragic thing to realize how long I convinced myself that times they will understand, they will change. Asterisk. The scariest thing in life isn't that evil people exist. The scariest thing is when you keep believing they will miraculously become good, even when every red flag is practically blinding you. I'm telling this story not to brag about how tough I am, and certainly not to preach. But if there is one thing I've learned, it's this. Choosing to walk away doesn't mean you lost. Walking away is the only way to stop them from dragging you down to the bottom of the ocean with them. I didn't stop them to get revenge or to prove I was right. I stopped them to save my own life, so my parents wouldn't have to blush with shame on my behalf. So the money I bled for at my corporate job wouldn't be treated as a communal slush fund. I don't need to talk about karma in this story. Eleanor lost the only thing she truly loved, the financial leverage she used to control people. Aaron lost his marriage and his safety net, not because I was a cold-hearted bitch, but because he made the wrong choice 1,000 times over, choosing silence when he needed to speak. The three relatives lost their dignity, showing up to a holiday looking for a free ride and fleeing like rats off a sinking ship. And me? I didn't lose my home, and I didn't lose my money. I only lost one illusion, the belief that if you just endure enough abuse, Eventually, people will start to value you. That New Year's, I didn't have a table groaning with caviar, and I didn't have a loud, roaring crowd, but I had something infinitely more valuable: absolute peace in my soul. And I learned that losing an illusion isn't a tragedy. Sometimes, it's a brutally late gift that finally forces you to grow up. And if I had to go back and do it all over again, I would do the exact same thing. Because there are some things in this world that, if you try to hold on to them, will completely break you. And letting them go, no matter how much it hurts in the moment, is the only way to ever stand up straight again.